everyone. Thank you for tuning in, as always, to Spilling the Tea. We have an extra special episode today. We have two wonderful guys from Workiva that we're going to talk about male allyship, breaking barriers, and challenging the norms. So I'm Katie Bateman, the content director at She Can Code. Welcome to Spilling the Tea. Guys, we're going to kick off with some background about each of you. So we have Oliver and Joe Dan with us today, as mentioned, from Workiva. Ollie, can we start with you with a little bit of background about you? Where are you from? What do you do?
So originally from Brighton. That's where my family and I grew up. I've worked in tech for almost 15 years now. Started out as tech sales. So started out as a BDR, so booking meetings and individual contributor. Met my wife at that company, then moved into leadership there. And then have been to 3 or 4 different tech companies, always in sales roles, in sales leadership roles. Now live in Southwest London with my wife, our 18-month-old daughter, and our 4-year-old dog called Ralph.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's quite a lot.
A busy, happy house. And my wife's also pregnant again. So
wow,
it's all go. Thank you. It's all go. It's all go.
Can I ask you quick, when you were younger, did you know you were going to work in tech? Did you fall in?
I 100% fell into tech. It wasn't part of my plan. I would say there was no plan apart from the loose, go to school, go to college, go to university. At university, I did history and politics. And I thought, when I ended, I don't want to be a historian. I don't want to be a politician. So what do I want to be? And then one of my friends worked at a company called Mimecast in sales. So he referred me in and I joined there. So that's how I got into it. But there wasn't a grand plan, that's for sure.
Yes, I hear that often. Often in tech. Joe Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Yourself, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Did you fall into tech? What do you do at Workiva?
Certainly. So I guess background. So I grew up in Texas, so a bit further away than Brighton. So I got into tech. Actually, it's funny the way that I got in, fell into it, but whenever I was in college, I was actually a geographic information science systems major. And at the same time, whenever I was doing that, or trying to pursue that, I actually opened a business with some friends in college. This was back in early 2000s. And it was basically Uber Eats, 20 years ago. And it was a business model that we thought was really neat. And we invested a lot and spent a couple of years running, but we had no idea what we were doing running a business. So I switched my major to marketing so that I could learn how to market the business. And through going through marketing, I ended up interviewing for a marketing role for a tech company. I didn't get that, but there was another role open, which was an account manager. And so I got into cloud hosting. Well, at that time, it was just Breadbox hosting. But that then progressed into cloud hosting, spent about 12 years working in technical support and operations, sales, database as a service management, quite a few different facets of the tech org. And then about 5 years ago, started here at Workiva, which has been an incredible journey. Started off running support, which then grew into our global support team, as well as product enablement. And then about a year and a half ago, moved here to the UK to run CPX, which is customer and partner experience for Europe.
Amazing. Quite the journey. And you haven't looked back. You haven't looked back from hopping across the Atlantic or coming into tech or...
No. I love it here in tech. Coming over here. So my wife and my 2 kids and my dog moved here. But my wife and I lived here 13 years ago. So we lived in the UK working for the tech company, which was Rackspace, and loved it. And so had just an incredible opportunity to come back. But no, to the question of tech, I love it.
Yes. Love that. That's why this podcast was started, to hear people that love working in tech. So I'm pleased that I've got 2 brilliant guests.
You got the right people in the room. You do. It's good.
We have a lot to cover off today. We're going to talk about male allies and breaking barriers. So I wanted to kick off with a question for you. How does having male allies contribute to a more inclusive workplace culture?
So in general, technology, same as a lot of industries, has a lot more men than women. And with there being less women, it means it's hard to have your voice heard. It's hard to drive the change you need to see and want to see because there are less of you. So if men ally themselves, if they get involved, if they are active participants, educate themselves, it amplifies that voice and makes it a lot easier to make the change we need to see. But also it makes women feel more comfortable asking, and makes women feel more comfortable pushing the agenda when there's men next to them doing the same thing on their behalf or with them. So it's really important. It's really important.
Yes, I love that. And just recognizing as well that, as you said, if a lady, she feels like there's something that she needs to be voiced, or there's something, even if it's a small thing that's happened in a meeting and she wants to voice something, that there are people there that she can go to, that she will be listened to, and that change can, is welcomed within a company. I think some really good companies, they know how to do that and to make everybody feel like they can have a voice and feel welcome. So yeah, I've heard at Workiva as well that people stay for a very long time for one of those reasons. And that at Workiva, our previous guest that we had actually on this podcast, the lady said to us, people tend to move around in Workiva instead of thinking, where am I going to go next? They think, actually, what can I do next? Because it takes a certain type of company to make you feel like you want to stay, and it's inclusive and everybody is definitely heard. Jo Dan, yourself, how does having male allies contribute to a more inclusive workplace culture, do you think? How important are male allies?
I mean, it's huge, right? I think it's important because we need to understand that you're not going to have a successful, sustainable, thriving, kind of evolving business if you don't face the fact that, inequality exists, right? And allyship is so important because what we need to do is really be open to the idea of listening and learning, and as leaders in as the responsibility really that should be taken on leaders and in terms of allyship is converting that learning into our capabilities as leaders to influence change, to drive change, and ultimately just create a better culture that everyone wants to be a part of.
Yes, and people look to you as well as the leader to set that example, and it trickles down, that if you're not setting that example as well, other people can feel that in the team. And that is something that we always say on this podcast, that doesn't happen overnight, and that is something that is just part of a company's DNA, and that takes a long time to have a leadership team, male or female, that are setting a good example for everybody.
Absolutely. It really starts at the highest levels with leadership, but it has to be part of your ethos and your culture, and you have to truly not only believe that that you need to be focused on equity and diversity and creating that environment, but you have to be actively involved at all levels of leadership in order to make that change.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. And on that note, I wanted to ask you a little bit about in what ways that male leaders can foster an environment that supports diversity and empowers everyone regardless of their gender. Are there any ways that you think male leaders can actually help and foster a culture of inclusion?
Yeah, certainly. So I think whenever you think of diversity and inclusion, one, it's just kind of recognizing what diversity really means. And whenever you're talking, age, sex, religion, cultural backgrounds, just a number of things, and realizing that there's unconscious bias that exists. And so I think that that's part of the responsibility in terms of male allyship is kind of recognizing that exists, and that's something that you constantly have to be working to overcome. But it needs to be incorporated into a lot of the processes that you have in place. A good example is your hiring process and being fair and equitable, having a very objective way of going about that hiring process. But it's not just about having a diverse pool of candidates that you're looking at, but also looking at the interviewing panel that you have, and do you have the right people that's representing different backgrounds and cultures that can weigh into those decisions. I also think it's just having very open communication with the team. As leaders, that is our job, is to make decisions that impact teams, individuals, processes, just everything that goes about driving a business forward. And we need to be really open to asking questions and pulling in different perspectives and understanding that those backgrounds and different perspectives ultimately can help shape a better decision. And whenever you're pulling in that different feedback, you also need to be celebrating the times when you do hear a difference of opinion, or you do hear, hey, did you think about this? Did you consider someone else's background or perspective in this process? And really celebrating that so that you can encourage others to think or to realize that that's the way that we should be operating and thinking as an organization and a company.
Definitely. I love the fact that you said, hey, did you think about this? There are so many companies that have put out products and they had wished that they had somebody on the team that had said, hey, did you think about this? Before we put that out and before there was that PR disaster or whatever it may be, to have a diverse team can sometimes really help you as a company, even just, before a product goes out as well, obviously the innovation involved. And as you said, celebrating those differences, and that you do have people that step forward and say, hey, did you think about this? And for instance, in the States, we wouldn't do it like that, or that wouldn't be met very well with our audience. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Any kind of diversity really does help, and to be mindful of that. You mentioned the interview process. That's before you even get in. How is that candidate feeling in their interview? Do they even want to work there after they've interviewed? All of those small things before you even encourage somebody to join your workforce is so important.
Yeah. And whenever you talk about the interview process, is that we really focus on cultural add. I think an old saying was someone needs to be a culture fit for a business, but we really look at it at Workiva as cultural add. Who is helping to evolve and change and reshape our culture, really to kind of meet the evolution of business and the environment in general. And that's something that we really applaud, is that diversity in thinking and making sure that we're pulling in multiple perspectives. And are we pulling in people who can help to elevate and change for the better our culture?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, completely agree. I love that culture add instead of a culture fit. I agree. You don't want people that just kind of fit in with the rest of the team. You want them to be different, and you want to celebrate that. I love that. Ollie, yourself, I know Workiva have some interesting diversity groups. Could you tell us a little bit about them and the types of things that male leaders could be doing there to help?
Yeah, sure. So we have our BERGs, which is Business Employee Resource Groups, which is a group or community of underrepresented people that can get together and educate the wider Workiva. They can drive change in Workiva. They can support each other, support other groups. So they're really important. They're a big part of Workiva's culture. And the same thing exists at a lot of companies, especially tech companies. For me, having worked at a few, I'd say Workiva is by far the most active with the BERGs, and it's promoted the most, and there's the most allies in those BERGs as well. And allies in that sense would be someone that doesn't necessarily, what's the word I'm looking for? They aren't from that group, but they want to support that group and move them forwards. And that's something that leaders can do. It's really important, is encourage participation. I think I mentioned it before, but there's a lot of gender inequality, I'd say, in tech companies. There's a lot of men, not as many women. A lot of men typically from similar backgrounds, maybe university backgrounds, and there isn't a BERG for that because you're not underrepresented. Yeah. However, you can encourage participation and say, go and find out something about different groups, see who you do align with and who you want to support. And they love that. They love having people to come in and champion their cause. They can get the message out to people outside of the immediate group. So that's something we can do, is make sure that people participate, educate themselves, and choose 1, 2, 3 to take part with, join events, and see what they can do to help.
I love that. And to not just get involved in your own group, but to actively get involved in others. I love that. So years ago, when the discussion of women in tech used to started coming up, conferences would hold, a talk with a women in tech panel, and all of the women in tech would head towards that discussion in the conference, and you'd see any ladies that were there all disappeared to that corner of that conference, had come off the exhibition floor, and the whole room was filled with ladies. And luckily now, when you go and see women in tech panels, it is not an equal split, but you do see a lot more male allies in that room. They want to get involved in the discussion. And I remember for years it was something that the ladies used to say, the men need to get involved because we need to move forward together and we have to have that conversation together. And and to be involved in groups that are not necessarily for you, but how you can help that group is, it's great that it's actively encouraged at Workiva. But they used to drive me insane. You'd see, that it would be a certain time of day, and then all the ladies would disappear off the show floor, and it was almost like they'd have their conversation, and then they'd come back again, and that was it. Whereas, now we're moving forward slowly because everybody's included in the conversation.
And I think especially as a leader, not taking part, you're doing your team a disservice, because you have women in your team, you have people from diverse backgrounds in your team. If you're not educating yourself and not taking part, you're not supporting them in the right way. You're supporting them in the way that you think from your background is the right way, but you're not taking part in the conversation, not learning from them. So it's really important. And Workiva is amazing at it, like by far. The most internal promotion and the most discussion around it that I've seen.
Yes, especially with that practice by behaviour.
Exactly.
If you're doing it, everybody else follows, and they might hear that you were part of a group, and you think, oh, actually, that sounded interesting. Maybe I'll go along, even it's something that they don't necessarily relate to at that point.
It's not just about encouraging people to go and join burgs and be active allies or members of these burgs, but as leaders, and it may be a small thing, but it's giving them the time and letting them know that not only is it okay to take the time to go join these causes and events, but actively working with them and making sure that all levels of leadership understand this is important to us as a business. And kind of going back to what I was talking about, you're not going to thrive and evolve as a business if you don't make this an important part of your culture. So that is something that you also see, is that when there are burg events, people have it in their calendar. We're out for an hour. We're out for a couple of hours. We're going to, if people are sitting as active members, sometimes they're traveling and going to spend a few days to talk about objectives and planning and events together. And we encourage that and really invest in that as a business. And it's, we want to make sure that people understand this isn't just something you're signing up for so that it's just checking a box. This is really an investment in something that we believe in.
Yes, I love that. I love that, not ticking a box. It's so important. We say that as companies that put out one tweet on International Women's Day, and that is the only thing that they do all year. We do see that. Yeah, job done. We see that a lot on IWD, and we love the companies that are working at that all year, and that, as you said, it's not just a tick in the box. It's something that is actively encouraged and is done 365 days of the year. All of that sounds great, though, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about challenges. So are there, what are the types of challenges that males have when they want to step forward as a male ally? Have you experienced any challenges yourself? Ollie, should we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I think something that I've seen as a challenge previously is when your own personal values for equality don't necessarily align with the company values. This is not Workiva, far from it. But just in general, like you see some companies where you can tell either from the outside or from working there that they don't have that top-down approach to equality, inclusion, diversity. And that makes it very difficult as a leader when you have people in your team that identify with an underrepresented group, because you can tell them something that you're going to be there to support them. But if the company policy or the company culture doesn't align with that, it makes it very difficult. At a previous organization, I had a team member who was concerned about going on parental leave because they didn't know if they would get the support that they would need at that time. Something I educated myself on recently, having a pregnant wife for the second time, is that the NHS guidelines for breastfeeding is 6 months. And if a woman is the main contributor to household finances, but then they only have maybe 2 months maternity leave or parental leave pay, then how do you plug that gap? Like, you have to make a decision. And as a leader, I can say, I'll support you with your parental leave, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you come back to the exact same role that you left, and you're supported to land back in your role exactly as it was. But if the company policy doesn't support that, it's very difficult for me to give confidence to my team that they are going to get what they need. So that's something that I've struggled with before, and I think it's what we're talking about today. It's about trying to make change at the highest level possible, so people feel like they can do the things they want to.
Definitely, yes. And and as we've touched upon in that does come from the top down, that feeling. We've had so many ladies on this podcast who've shared their experience of going on mat leave and what that was like, and whether or not they were nervous about sharing that news. Some came back and found themselves promoted and thought, why on earth was I even nervous? But some have told me as well that they're at good companies, they receive a letter from the CEO, for instance, saying congratulations, enjoy your time off. And there's that feeling of it comes from the top down. It's okay, go and enjoy your time, take what you need. When you come back, as you said, your job will be there. And just that alignment with the company values is so important, and must really change the way that you think about when you want to leave and start a family temporarily, come back. It's all of that mindset is so important. But as we say, again, it's setting a good example, but it has to align with your company values.
Definitely. And I mean, I've seen a live example of it recently with my wife, who had maternity leave at her current company. Went amazingly well. They're very supportive. She's got a great boss. Pregnant again, and she was nervous about saying. And I was like, they were so supportive. Like, you get on with them so well. And she's like, yeah, but like, it's the second time in 2 years. And even though she had a direct example of it going well and being supported, you're still nervous. So I can't imagine what it'd be like when you have no examples, or you have a bad example, and then you've got to go through the whole thing again. So it's something that, like, as men, you don't necessarily go through, or not in the same way. But it's really important to be mindful of. Like, if we're having that conversation, you've got to think, like, there's been a long run up to this for this person. They might have been worrying about it for days, weeks, months even. So they're finally having the conversation, but we need to make sure that you are aware it's not just a conversation.
Definitely. And Jodan, yourself, do you think there are lots of common challenges like that for male allies? What do you think some of those challenges are when you do want to step forward and say, I'm a male ally, I'm gonna help?
Yeah. So I again would reiterate what was said by Oliver in terms of some of the concerns that came in from people who worked at other companies and may have had some poor experiences. I think that it's important as a male ally is recognizing that that's something that's going to take years and years to overcome, and it's our responsibility to really face the fact that that's where it is. But it's our responsibility and our opportunity to be able to change that and reshape that type of thinking. I'll tell you, I had an example, and just talking about some of the hardship, is that I even feel as a leader that as much as I work to build a very trusting relationship with any employee, especially a female employee, is that it's still more difficult to probably get to the level of trust and vulnerability that is needed to really understand kind of drivers and motivators of that individual. An example from my past was had an incredible leader working for me, a woman who, whenever we talked about motivations and career trajectory and really what are you working towards, it was always about experience and wanting to just do more things, build on my skill set to be able to do more things. But whenever asking direct questions about pay and things of that nature, it was always off the table. And by saying off the table, it just, no, that wasn't a priority. But then that individual, and this is years ago, went on to go to another team, but it was more of a decision based on pay. And it just helped me to realize that you really have to be working to understand what are those motivators and what can I do as an ally to help build trust with the individual, with the woman on the team, of knowing it's okay, it's safe to be able to talk about those motivators. I can actually help to shape some of your development plan towards this. I can help you to grow in your career, and I'm not going to hold that against you. And some of that just comes in of just years and years past of inequity with pay, and it seeming like if I was to raise one of my motivators being pay, that I would look down upon you, right? And that's not the case at all. And I think that's one of the things that as a male ally that you have to do, again, is let that individual know that it's okay. This is a safe space. The more that I understand about you and what motivates you and what drives you is going to help me to help you shape your career, and I can help to facilitate that and help to grow you into that area.
Definitely, to retain good talent, whether it's on your team or even at your company, just think to get ahead of that so they don't think, you know what, I didn't feel like I could have that conversation. And especially with pay, it's such a hard one to, you know, people always think that it comes out as I'm only asking for that because I just want more money. And that could be, you might want to start a family, you could be, you know, taking out your first mortgage, it could be lots of reasons as to why you're looking for that pay rise, not necessarily, you know what, I just really want some more money. You know? But having that with your line manager is sometimes so difficult. And a lot of ladies will really struggle to think, how do I have that? Do I even have that? Or do I just jump ship and go elsewhere? But like you said, you know, it's understanding that so you can keep that good talent, retain them. And like at Workiva, people just stay, you know, having that safe environment where you can just talk about things, and the worst that can happen is that somebody says not right at this time, and that's it. But you know, we can work towards that. I completely agree with that, and I love the fact that you said about bad examples, and that as well, when that bad example comes into your team, they might have had a bad example in the past, but it's just letting them know as well that that's not the case here, because they are going to have certain things that they've brought with them, and if they were to tell the team that, the team might start thinking, oh, actually, is that the case here? Or, you know, I haven't gone on maternity leave, how is that going to be, because that lady told me at her last company it was dreadful. So it's kind of setting that tone as well and saying, you know, that's not what it's like here. And as a male ally, I'm just, you know, just to keep reiterating that to the team about what the culture is like. And it's not something that is said in one speech at an annual company do, you know, it's something that is said every day, and catching those things on your team definitely is, you know, setting a good example. If somebody has had a bad example, definitely. I couldn't agree more. That actually leads me on to guidance, because I wanted to ask you a little bit about what guidance would you offer to men if they are aspiring to serve as male allies? Do you have it? I mean, that was a great one there, kind of, you know, jumping in and making sure that if there is a bad example, and you've been a little bit more mindful of how people might be thinking. Do you have any other guidance for men that, you know, they might think, I'd love to be a male ally, but I'm not that confident in trying, or maybe I'm going to get shot down somewhere, or maybe a lot of it is I'm going to say the wrong thing. You know, I hear that constantly about, it doesn't happen so much anymore, but men used to say, you know, I'd only get dragged into a room when I'm being told I have to have some training because I've said something wrong in the workplace. Whereas actually a lot of men would love to come in on the conversation and really help and be a leader. So do you have any guidance for how they can do that?
Yeah. So talking about male allyship, there's one is just leading with vulnerability, right? It's letting any individual know, but specifically in this conversation, women know, like, it is a safe space. Being vulnerable means really opening up. It's sharing information about yourself, your personal life. It's asking for help as a leader, and really asking what within that person's environment, their working environment specifically, that you as a leader could be doing to make an improvement, to really create and foster just a better working environment they want to be a part of and would be proud of. I also think that there's, as a leader, to really foster this idea of allyship, is that it's really important to be mindful of just quality of how you're running your teams and looking across everyone. But it's really fairness in terms of opportunity that I think comes into play. So we talked about hiring practice earlier. That's one example. But I would also say, just whenever you're looking at opportunities on your team as a leader and really wanting to be an ally, is really asking yourself, have I been fair in terms of, there's a new opportunity that came up, there's a project, do I have good diversity across this project team? Am I asking the right questions to the right group of people to understand, are we making the right progress or the right decisions around these? Another thing, and I've got an example of this, but it's making sure that you're being intentional about where you're providing opportunities, but also, I guess from a delegation standpoint, where you're delegating tasks and asks, and where you're not. my wife has been a successful executive in technology for 18 years now. But that was quite a journey for her. And she once worked for a group. It was a tech team. It was all male leaders, and she was the only female in that group, the only woman. And whenever she first joined that team, she sat into a meeting room and they had a team meeting, and she raised her hand and said, "I'll take notes for this meeting." And then the next week, she raised her hand and said, "I'll take notes." And then the third week, it was just expected that she was going to take notes.
Yes.
And her boss at the time pulled her aside and said, "You're not doing that anymore. I'm not going to delegate this." Not that he ever did delegate, but there's an expectation that she was going to own this administrative task.
Yeah.
And I think he represented just a really shining example of good allyship, of saying, no, that is a task that needs to be shared amongst everyone, and you're not going to grow and be viewed as an equal within this team until we share some of those administrative type of responsibilities, and we need to elevate your positioning and more understanding that you are equal across the table of this group of leaders. And so I think that's a big part of allyship amongst males and men, is that we need to be intentional about where we're pulling people into opportunities, specifically women into opportunities, but also when we're saying you shouldn't be doing this, or we need to spread out some of this responsibility because we don't want to put you in a position that it is kind of disenfranchising you as an individual.
Yes, I love that. There's a great example. We've been very intentional about it, and just making sure that task wasn't left with her. I also think that as well with being intentional about how you are seen as a leader when you are setting that example. For instance, if you are a leader that needs to leave for a nursery pickup, for instance, and that your team knows that, and that you are intentional about, you know what, I have that in my calendar, I'm going to leave at that time because I have a family thing that I need to do, and then I'll be back online a little bit later. But it's all of those things that are intentional that your team see, and they pick up on that, and that really builds your team and how you're going to function. But yeah, I love that example of somebody stepping in, and especially when she's in the room, because you hear a lot about male sponsors, and I've had some great male sponsors throughout my career who they're the people that are fighting for you when you're not in the room, and they're saying good things about you when you're not in the room. But for somebody to step forward as well when you're in the room and to say, actually, you know what, this job, that one, it's not just for you, you're not just the note taker. Somebody that is very intentional about that is so important, definitely. Ollie, do you have any guidance for men that want to step forward as a male ally?
I think the first thing I'd say is that you mentioned men don't know where to start or don't know if there'll be how to get involved. Is women would love to have you. They'd love to have you part of the group. They'd love to have the chance to educate you and have you participate and help drive the conversation. So that's the first thing. In general, my advice for male leaders would be communication is really important. Whether it's in a team setting, like the words you use, how you communicate, or in a one-to-one setting. I think in technology, I'm sure it's so in loads of industries, but I don't know those, so I'll talk about technology. Very fast-paced, can be very high pressure, and it can be very easy to go straight to business when you get on a one-to-one call or on a team call. But it's very important to learn to take a step back and have the time to talk to that person about how are they experiencing this pressure, how are things going in their life, what's troubling you or what's top of mind, rather than going straight in, because otherwise they don't have that safe space to talk about what might be challenging them. And if you don't have the same background or the same experiences, you might not know how they'll be experiencing different things. So taking time to communicate, I think, is very important. Always having that time at the start of a call to sort of level set rather than go straight in is important.
Definitely, yes. And some people only see that as chit chat sometimes, and it's not. It's far more than that. It's hearing about what, and that's not even being nosy about, what's going on in your life
Yeah.
and all of those. There is a fine balance, but you do need to hear those conversations. Somebody might be very stressed about something. They don't want to share too many details about what's going on in their life, but you're absolutely right. Just hearing that actually, they might be late to work because of certain reason, or they might have somebody they're caring for, whatever it may be. And just hearing that can sometimes make you think, I really need to communicate a little bit more with my team. I wanted to touch upon mutual accountability and raising standards. Jodan, you touched upon it a little bit there, pointing out things when people see them. And I've heard this as well in meetings, things like if a lady feels like perhaps her voice isn't being heard and somebody's just stepping in and saying, you're talking over someone, or, just being more accountable for that. What are the ways that we could do that? I mean, speaking up is a big one, isn't it? That if you see a bad example, just pointing that out and saying, that's not okay in our company culture.
Yeah, I think at one level, mutual accountability is kind of working with some of the bigger departments that help shape a lot of our policy. So it's working with our people and culture team whenever it comes to benefits, and it's working within the leadership team of commitments of how we are making decisions to be more focused, continually more focused on diversity and equity. But to me, I think there's a big component of in terms of accountability. You spoke to it, but it's speaking out in public forums to not only recognize or identify if something is against our culture or is disenfranchising anyone through any of the statements or anything that was done, really calling that out as behavior that is unacceptable. I think that there is also just an element of really creating kind of a zero tolerance rule around certain language. I think it's so important, and we kind of talked to it earlier, but words matter, and it's so important the way that we evolve and change the way that we are using words in a way that it again doesn't diminish any specific group. And I guess one example that I can think of that I personally went through, and shame on me for this, but and luckily I had an amazing leader who helped correct me on this. But I remember sitting in a meeting, and this was years ago, I've learned. But I was in a team meeting and ended up saying, we were talking about something, but I ended up saying, oh yeah, the girls did this. And my leader, who was male leader, stopped me in the meeting and said, you mean the women? And it was just a brief, it was perfect feedback. Nothing else had to be, said to me, but it was just being mindful of certain language should not be tolerated. And things like saying, you think girls and guys, right? But it really has an effect on individuals if you were to say girls. And so I learned a lesson very quickly of that has no place in the workspace. And I think that's something in terms of overall accountability, is that we have to be listening out for the language that's being used. And if you hear anything, it's your responsibility, it's your obligation to be able to say something, stand up and say, hey, that's not right. Or there's a better way that you could be saying that, because we need to be more inclusive.
Yes, definitely. And I love that you had experienced that, and you probably go on to then say that to other people, and that has a knock-on effect within the company, definitely. And it's leading by example. Companies where I've worked at, where you get in and somebody would say, the workforce is toxic, or there's this strange culture going on. You think actually it's not. It's people are just not calling out those little things that happen every day, because those little things, they turn into big things. And then people are leaving because they don't feel like that's a company they want to stay at. So I completely agree on that. And I love that if you do hear something or see something, just to call it out. It doesn't have to be I formally reported somebody. Yeah. It's just, calling somebody out and saying, have you thought about that? And people are not always mindful as well of language. You are absolutely right. We run hackathons at She Can Code, and in the past, I worked at a company where we run a transgender hackathon, and I had to make sure that everybody was just a bit more mindful of the language that day, because it's not something that you use every day. So you're absolutely right that people don't know as well. And that hackathon, people were so open, and there was no kind of you said something wrong. It was kind of come and educate yourself, come and learn something new, and be open to that day. And it was a great day. And most of the time people don't take it as you said something wrong. Joe Dan, you shouldn't have said girls in that meeting. It was kind of, you just learn from your experience.
Yeah. I would also say though, that's obviously the environment that we want to have, is that people can feel empowered, that it's part of our culture, that you can call that behavior out and be able to correct it on the spot, or do it in a one-on-one setting. But what we also have at Workiva that I'm really proud of having is that we've got a really amazing people and culture team that are also here for, if someone calls out a behavior but it's consistent, you continue, it's repeated. Not that I've seen examples of this, but we've got a really strong people and culture team who are there for receiving feedback. That if you don't feel safe giving the feedback to that individual or to their manager, you can give anonymous feedback directly into the people and culture team. You can go directly to a leader's leader, and you can go if you want to go to our SVP of people and culture, you can. And that's something that we actively talk about in all teams meetings with the whole company, of this should be a safe space, but if ever you don't feel comfortable providing feedback, it could be a number of different things that you have feedback on. But if for any reason, if you don't feel comfortable giving that feedback, you can go directly to the team and do it either directly with your people and culture representative, or you can do it anonymously. But we have many ways of providing that feedback, so we can ensure that there's behaviors that don't exist or permeate throughout our business, and people just have to accept that's the way it is.
Yes, I love that. So if you should feel encouraged to do that every day, but just in case there is a safe space there,
Yes.
and there are mechanisms in place, which is so valuable, and not something that all companies have either, which is very strange. That you would think that most companies have something in place, but that takes time to build that culture, and to let people know that is a safe space for them to say something if they need. Ollie, yourself, what about mutual accountability? I mean, that's incredibly important, isn't it? It's not just one person, it is down to an entire team, an entire culture that moves forward together.
Definitely. I think Joe Dan said it perfectly. It's about doing the right thing even when it's not easy, and calling things out and having the discussions. I think the thing that a lot of people find more difficult is when, like you said, when it's to someone more senior than them, so to their boss or their boss's boss. Something that in software sales is always a hot topic is hiring. They need to hire as fast as possible, because if you've got someone not in the role, then they're not closing deals, we're not hitting our numbers, etc., etc. There's always, historically, other companies, a lot of pressure to hire very quickly.
Yeah.
Now, if we hired from the first 100 CVs we received in any tech company in sales, you'd probably have 99% males. 99% men. Something that Workiva is very good at is that mutual accountability between the hiring team and the hiring managers, especially in sales, to allow us to slow down, allow us to explain to the business we're creating a diverse pool of candidates, and it might take us twice as long. It might take us a long time to hire, but what it means is we have hired the best person regardless of gender, background, because we've spent time making sure the pool of candidates is very diverse. And I've worked at organizations where there is a lot of pressure to hire very quickly, but Workiva is excellent at that. And that's a joint link between, for me personally, the sales team and the hiring team, to know that we're going to do it the right way rather than the easy way, which is let's look at the first 10 CVs and get someone in tomorrow.
Yeah. And
It's
that's
very
building a
important.
team for the long term as well. People that
Exactly.
they should be there, they have the right skills, they're going to want to enjoy working there. All of that takes time. You're right. It's not kind of, we had 10 CVs in and we picked one.
Yeah.
That person is going to be unhappy, or the team are going to be unhappy with who came in, and they're going to exit pretty quick. So yeah, that is definitely building a team for the
Yeah.
long run. What do you hope for the future? What do you hope to see in terms of the future, in terms of changes around inclusivity in the workplace? Do you have any hope for the future?
Lots of hope. Lots of hope.
That's good to hear.
So from my perspective, I'd like to see more women get into leadership roles in tech. It's something that I've seen like in previous roles. There's been women that I felt would be excellent leaders, but they're not as keen to put themselves forwards. They're not as sure if it's the path for them. Whereas usually with men, it's something they are keener to do. So it's about creating that environment where women feel like they can progress into a leadership role, into a management role, and then move on into senior leadership, C-level. But it all starts with that first step, and something that I think Workiva again is great at, but should be better in general, is creating a safe environment for them to be successful when they make that move. I think something that is always very difficult is when you move into your first leadership role, but I can't imagine how much more difficult it is if you're a woman moving into your first leadership role, leading a team of maybe all men, joining a leadership team of mainly all men, and not knowing who to go to ask the stupid questions because you're new, you're not sure. So having people internally you can go to and say, hey, I need some help, or can we have a weekly call, or can you talk me through how you went through this, is really important. So creating that environment is super key. And at Workiva, I mentioned before, we've got our Berg, so we've got the Women Berg, who are there to promote women at Workiva and outside Workiva, and they do a lot of work with women within Workiva, helping them advance their careers, helping them understand the opportunities available to them, having internal, external speakers, enablement, which really helps with that. But yeah, more women getting into leadership, and then more support once they do to make sure they can thrive, I think is something we can probably all be better at.
Definitely, yes. And I think that leads into mentorship and support as well, because we have lots of ladies on this podcast that say when they step into a leadership role, they have an experience like that, or they suddenly think, I have to know everything because I'm in leadership and my whole team expects me to have the answer to everything. So to have somebody to go to, a good example, or a group that can help you, and to say, you know what, actually, you're not the only person that's feeling that way. Everybody has felt that way. Is so important, because, we are encouraged to get mentors outside of our company as well, and that's great that you can have internal and external resources, as you said, but sometimes if it's just somebody that you want to ask day to day, or something about your culture at your company that only another employee at Workiva would really understand, then having that network internally to help would be invaluable.
Definitely.
Yourself, Joe Dan, what do you think, hope for the future and changes in the developments to foster a more inclusive environment?
Yeah, I completely agree with what he was talking about in terms of creating more of an opportunity for leadership development with women. I can say that I'm really proud of where we are as a business right now. Obviously, there are areas to improve, many areas. But if I look at like our C-suite and look at our senior leaders who are really helping to shape and drive our business globally, we've got our CIO and our CFO and my amazing boss, who is our chief customer officer, and our CEO, Julie, very influential, amazing female leaders in our business. And I think that that's setting a really good example for what we want to see permeate throughout the rest of our business, is a really healthy blend of all genders that exists, because we, at least me personally, I really believe that whenever those teams are together and talking about strategy, talking about vision and where we're going as a business, that there's a well-rounded view and discussion that is happening that ultimately helps shape the direction where we're going as a business. But to your point, that doesn't exist all the way down. We need to continue to be more influential in helping to create mentorship programs and create that opportunity to see more women kind of fill in some of those kind of middle to senior level leadership roles. I guess when I also think about the future is that I don't want to just see that we're making a lot of progress internally and we're creating this amazing culture for anyone who's here, but I want to see this really be exposed to the greater tech industry of look what type of progress we can make in terms of the investment that we're making and being very culturally diverse and how do we influence other businesses to follow in suit. And I think that this is a good example of talking to you and really getting out and starting to share some of our best practice or some of our shortcomings and what we're doing to overcome those so that we can help to foster just a better, more equitable environment, globally.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with that trickles out to the wider tech community, and you're absolutely right. Sharing what you're doing well and sharing what isn't working is so useful for other companies to hear as well and say, you know what, we tried this, it didn't quite work, so this is how we've moved forward in that way. Can really help companies, especially as companies start and then they grow. If they're not thinking about diversity and inclusion when they are a startup, that's not in their DNA, they're going to really struggle when they grow into a larger company and then look back and think, oh, I wish we'd had that in our hiring process, right from day one. So you're right, absolutely right. Sharing that with the rest of the industry is very important. We are almost out of time, and I wanted to just ask you one last question about male allies and how can male allies use their influence and networks to address unconscious bias and promote a more equitable distribution of opportunities within their organisations? That was incredibly wordy just to say. How can male allies use their influence within their own networks? What do you think, Ollie?
So something I've done a lot of over the past 4 or 5 years is using my network. I'll speak about my actual network on LinkedIn, for example, to actually look and reach out to potential candidates for roles, because historically, I don't know what it was, but I saw a study where males or men will apply for a role if they can do like 20% of it and think I'll learn the rest. Yeah. And with women, it's the opposite. They won't apply because they think I'm not the perfect candidate. So that's part of the problem with getting so many CVs for men and not enough for women. So one of the things that I try and do and encourage other leaders to do and encourage my team to do is reach out to people in their network that might not be actively looking, but let them know about roles we have available, roles they see available in their network they think they might be a good fit for, because then it helps to maybe for a woman to sit up and go, oh, actually, yeah, I wouldn't have thought about that because maybe I don't fit this exact bullet point here, but the rest I can do. So that's something I think is quite important. Some of the best people that we've hired as an organization have come from that personal outreach or that personal referral. And that person might not have looked at the role if they hadn't been spoken to about it. So that's something we can do to definitely help promote more diversity and more equality.
Definitely. And I have heard that before about ladies will not always apply for something unless they tick all of those boxes. I've had some incredible ladies on here share their stories of that. And I had one lady who said to me, I had to learn C++ for my interview. And she said, I'd never done C++. So I learned it in 2 weeks before the interview. And the company were aware that I kind of just scraped through. But they love the fact that she just embraced, I'm going to learn C++. And they said they just saw her as somebody that was willing to soak up anything that they were going to throw at her. And they hired her because they said, you know what, you're gonna learn everything. You're willing to be open and try things. And she said, if I hadn't have just thought to myself, I'm just going to go for it, I'm just going to try it, she wouldn't have landed that great job and her path would have been very different. So I'm not saying we all have to learn C++ if we're all going for an interview that, requires it. But you're absolutely right. Just being mindful that perhaps the right candidates for your team are not always applying. So just reaching out and being mindful of that. Definitely, I agree.
Yeah.
Jodan, yourself, what do you think about influencing, how male allies can use their networks to be more influential?
Yeah, so to the same. I think it's really staying close to the network. I've had the opportunity to work with just amazing women, and especially whenever certain roles open, knowing we're in a here at Workiva, we do different things than I've done at other companies, but keeping that network strong, reaching out and actually saying, hey, we've got some positions that have opened. I really think that you would be a good fit for this, and just actively working to try to, use my network to pull people in. And it's not just, roles for my team, it's any of the roles. And so it's being mindful of all the amazing hiring opportunities, open roles that we have at Workiva, and just plugging into the network and just kind of leveraging some of those amazing relationships that I've had in the past, and try to continue to pull good talent into the business. Somewhat of an answer to the question, but one thing that I also really like to do is, whenever we talked about mentorship earlier, and whenever we have current employees, women who want to grow, you may not have the right mentor to provide them, internally, and it may be that there's a few different choices, but those individuals just either are already mentors to others. There's just not the I wouldn't say time to focus, because that's not as much of a concern, but it's just not an option for one reason or another. But I've actually reached out to some incredible women that I've worked with in the past and asked, hey, would you mind having a 30-minute conversation with this person? They're on a similar trajectory that you were in your career years ago, and I'd love to just connect the two of you. And so that's one way that I've kind of used my network, is just to bring women together and be able to talk about their journey, some of the things that they did to overcome certain challenges and be prepared for that next level role. And that's something that I want to continue to do, is just connect people who may not be in the same business but have been on similar journeys.
Yes, yeah, that's brilliant advice for other male allies. It's just a way that you can help there and connect the dots. There might be, for instance, somebody stepping into a leadership role for the first time, or somebody that is, nervous about starting a family, or whatever it may be. Just connecting them to hear somebody else have that same experience of you. And I've had lots of ladies on this podcast that say you might feel the same way as well as men in leadership, but being in leadership sometimes is incredibly lonely, and you don't always have that network of people that you can share your thoughts and feelings with, because you don't want to worry your team if something is wrong, but you do want to share it with somebody, and having somebody that can connect those dots with other leaders, for instance, internally or externally, can be so helpful, and super helpful for ladies that are thinking about moving into different leadership positions, or even moving up the ranks. Is really good advice. We are already out of time. Thank you so much, Joe, Dan and Ollie, for coming in today, sharing your insights, for taking time out of your busy days, sharing what life is like at Workiva as well. So thank you so much for that. It's been an absolute pleasure. And for everybody listening, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.